The early morning fog clung to the Smoky Mountains like a secret. Dew slicked the pine needles and turned fallen leaves to mush under Mark's boots. A crow barked from a nearby hemlock, startling a squirrel into frantic retreat. Mark, steady and silent, kept walking, the weight of the 5-gallon bucket in his hand sloshing low with yesterday's mash sample. Behind him, Digger followed close, his gait slower, older, but no less sure. The two men moved like ghosts through the woods, familiar with every root and ridge. Their path curved down an old logging trail long abandoned to undergrowth. Blackberry bramble and creeping ivy tugged at their coveralls as they moved deeper into the forest. They were headed to an old hunting cabin, long forgotten by the law and mostly forgotten by men, except for them. The place was barely more than a shack. Warped planks, a rusted tin roof, a busted stovepipe chimney, and a trapdoor cellar. But to Mark and Digger, it was hallowed ground. Their test site. Weeks back, they'd begun fooling with a new grain bill. Sorghum, malted barley, and a whisper of wild cherry bark. Not for sweetness, but for smoke. They wanted something bold. Not a sippin' whiskey. A whiskey that kicked down the door and left teeth rattling. As Mark unlatched the creaking door, a sharp scent hit them. It was sour, yes, but not rotten. A tang layered with sweetness and spice. Digger paused at the threshold, his eyes narrowing, head tilting. Not in confusion, but recognition. He had smelled something like it once before. Long ago, in a holler still run by a man no one mentioned anymore. That man had made a run of sour mash that got folks whispering in Tennessee and hollering in Kentucky. But then, just like that, he vanished. Word was the mash turned on him. Too volatile. Too strange. Or maybe too valuable. Inside, the darkness swallowed the weak morning light. Dust danced in beams that filtered through warped slats. On a wooden workbench sat their fermenter, a 55-gallon barrel marked with charcoal scroll. Batch X. The lid bulged. Not outward. Inward. Like something inside had collapsed. Mark leaned in. The surface of the mash bubbled slowly, but not like it should. This wasn't the usual froth and hiss of a healthy fermentation. It was controlled. Intentional. Every bubble seemed to rise on cue, like some strange pulse. The color, too, had shifted, no longer the dull brown of their usual brews. It was darker, denser, like molasses soaked in shadows. Mark dipped a finger and brought the liquid to his nose, then paused. His eyes locked with Digger's. They both knew. This wasn't the same batch they'd left to ferment. Something had happened. Something. Chemical. Maybe microbial. Maybe magic. Back at the truck, the testing rig waited. They filled jars carefully, not jostling, not stirring the bottom, almost reverent. The drive down the mountain was silent. No banter. No old stories. Only the weight of the discovery sitting thick between them. At Digger's workshop, the still hissed away in the background, cooking down a routine batch. But the jars from the cabin stood apart, like trespassers in sacred ground. They poured a measure into the hydrometer flask. The numbers didn't lie. The ABE was off the charts, far beyond what the original grain bill should have produced. Yet, the mash didn't smell overly alcoholic. It held depth. Layers. Earth, wood, citrus, pepper. A haunting sweetness at the edge, like honeysuckle just before dusk. They ran it through a small copper test still. The drip started slow, then fast. The distillate came out clear as mountain air, but with legs like syrup. They poured it into a glass and watched as it clung to the sides, reluctant to let go, like it knew it was special. Tasting was careful. Ritualistic. One sip. Then silence. Then another. Neither man spoke, but their eyes told the tale. This wasn't moonshine as they knew it. It wasn't whiskey. It was something else entirely. An alchemy of time, wild yeast, and Appalachian mystery. A spirit with its own soul. The days that followed, they tried to recreate it. Same ingredients, same process, same temperatures, but nothing came close. The new batches were good. Dang good. But not that. They returned to the cabin, scouring for clues. Mark noticed the mash barrel had shifted, just slightly, closer to the wall where sunlight pierced through a warped board. That warmth, that angle of light, had likely kick-started some rare interaction. Maybe a mutation. Maybe a bacterial symphony born of decay and chance. They checked the local flora. A moss growing on the north side of the cabin wall gave off a pungent, almost floral aroma when crushed. Could it have leached into the air? Into the mash? Was it airborne? Digger kept a sample of the original mash. Sealed it tight in a mason jar and buried it under cedar chips in his root cellar, far from eyes and air. A secret within a secret. As word spread about the new test batch, carefully leaked to only the most trusted palates, whispers grew. A few lucky tasters called it legendary. Others claimed it wasn't legal, not morally. Too smooth. Too potent. Too perfect. Some said it was cursed on man offered cash. Another offered a used truck. A third, a distillery license and full setup in Nashville. They turned them all down after decades of perfecting the craft. The mountains still held mysteries deeper than any man could tame. They scaled back operations. The other stills sat dry. Every day was about the sow mash now. About decoding it. Harvesting every variable. Some nights they slept in the cabin, hoping the mountain would speak again. That it might offer another miracle. Then came the thunderstorm. Lightning split the pine ridge above the cabin, fire catching fast on dry needles. The blaze raged through the woods before the rains put it out. In the aftermath, the cabin stood, scorched but upright. But inside, everything had changed. The fermenter had cracked. The original mash spilled and dried in strange spirals on the wooden floor, like some ancient script written in liquor and time. Mark took it hard. Digger even harder. Weeks of work. A once-in-a-lifetime fluke. Gone. But then, while clearing the charred debris, Digger found a single unbroken jar tucked into the floorboards. The burial jar. The original. Untouched. Safe. They took it back to the workshop. This time, they didn't try to recreate it. They didn't test or analyze. They honored it. They cut it lightly with rainwater from the storm. Poured it into a single hand-blown bottle. No label. No markings. Just clear liquid and deep reverence. They didn't drink it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It wasn't a product. It was proof that the mountains still held power. That the old ways still mattered. That sometimes the best things weren't built. They were stumbled upon, blessed, and kept close. And so they worked on, day by day, chasing that echo, that taste of something otherworldly. Knowing full well it might never come again, but also knowing that it had come once, and that was enough to change everything. The mountains held onto their secrets the way an old-timer clutched a well-worn flask, tight, quiet, and full of stories. Mark and Digger knew that better than most. They'd spent their lives chasing the perfect run, tracing the footsteps of long-gone outlaws through thickets, forgotten trails, and hollers where time moved slower. September fog curled low across the valley as the two men trudged up the ridge, boots sinking into damp loam. A weathered still site, abandoned years ago, had caught Digger's attention while studying old maps. He figured it might still be useful. Mark wasn't convinced. But in the business of backwoods whiskey, you didn't ignore a hunch, especially not one that led this deep into the mountain's shadow. Briars tore at their pants as they ducked under low limbs. An owl, startled from its perch, launched into the heavy air without a sound. Just ahead, the remnants of a collapsed lean-to came into view. Rusted sheet metal, rotted logs, and one blackened barrel, half sunk in the ground like a forgotten relic. It wasn't much to look at, but the soil had that smell. Earthy, sour, a ghost of fermentation past. Digger poked around the barrel with a stick, his brow furrowed. The inside was crusted but not dry. Moisture lingered beneath the old wood, and a faint whiff of mash clung to the air like smoke to wool. Mark knelt to touch the ground, fingers coming away sticky with residue. Something had fermented here. Something recent. Curious, they followed a runoff trail that led a few yards down the slope to a moss-covered cistern. The lid, made of stone and timber, lay askew. Beneath it was a dark pool, the surface slick with the telltale sheen of fermenting grain. This wasn't from years ago. This mash was alive. Neither man spoke. They didn't need to. The glance they exchanged said enough. Someone, or something, had been working here, and not long ago. Mark scooped a sample into a mason jar, while Digger examined the surrounding brush for tracks. No footprints, no boot marks, no sign of animals. Just silence, ferment, and damp earth. Back at their own still site, tucked away behind a thicket of hemlock and poison ivy, they lit the burner and cleaned the rig. The sample from the cistern sat in the sunlight, a dark caramel hue glinting gold at the edges. The smell had matured on the hike. Tangy, pungent, rich with notes of wet corn and overripe fruit. It was sour mash, all right, but not like anything they'd made before. The first run was cautious. They used a small test still, coiled copper, and a tiny thumper, just enough to see what this thing wanted to become. The distillate came out clean, but heavier than expected. It clung to the glass like oil and left a residue on the lip. The scent curled into their nostrils, deep and strange, like caramelized apples with a kick of pepper.